So good morning, everyone. My name is Liam Bulger. I'm the National Coordinator for the Men's Development Network in Ireland. And I welcome this opportunity this morning to share with you a process called A New Conversation with Men. This conversation has supported me to develop as a man, as a father, and as a men's development facilitator. It was developed by the Men's Development Network over a 30-year period through engaging with men from a broad range of backgrounds and experiences. In order for us to understand the dynamics of working with men developmentally, it was important for us to understand how we had developed as men ourselves, particularly in our relationships to our family, our community, and our broader society, including institutions such as the church, the education system, and the state. I will describe over the next few minutes how this process was developed and what were the key factors to establishing a new conversation with men. But firstly, can I bring your attention to the photograph behind me? When I first saw this photograph, I just thought, what a beautiful photograph it is. And also how equally beautiful it would be for these men to be passing on a legacy of love and connection from one generation to the next. Of the many men who are fathers that I've engaged with over the years, the vast majority of them want loving, nurturing and caring relationships with their children. Yet, myself included, we sometimes struggle as men to connect to our love for our children. These struggles became visible as we were developing this process, and I think it's important to say briefly what some of the barriers were that we experienced in establishing a new conversation with men. In order to do that, I'd like to share with you some of my own personal experiences to demonstrate what those barriers were and how they were visible in my life. When I was 27 years old, a man asked me respectfully, probably for the first time in my life, "How are you, Liam?" While I'd been asked this question many times before, this was the first time I felt safe enough to answer the question honestly. Even though I'd already lost my brother when I was 7, my father when I was 17, my best friend when we were both 21, and I was struggling as a compulsive gambler at the time, I never really spoke to anyone about these issues. Those years were a dark and difficult time in my life, when I was busy keeping up a front in my relationships, in work, and as a compulsive gambler. I might have appeared to many as being a confident young man, but inside I felt deeply insecure, isolated, and shy. I feel somewhat guilty about stating this now, as I was already married at the time. And even though my partner had supported me tremendously to give up my compulsive gambling, we never spoke about the underlying issues, nor could we, as I had completely disconnected from myself, my pain, my loss, my sadness, my grief, and of course my joy. The culture was one of patriarchy, underpinned by male gender conditioning. Men were supposed to be strong, stoic, invulnerable, and in control. This conditioning seemed almost impossible to penetrate, particularly so because it was also invisible. I only knew what I had internalized from those significant others in my life, my family, my peer group, community, teachers, priests, and the establishment. I had no alternative reference point until that very moment that man asked me, "How are you, Liam?" In that moment, I became my own reference point. Though I didn't realize it at the time, this conversation and the many conversations that would follow would empower me to change my relationship with myself, my relationship to others, and my place in the world. This was truly a new conversation with men. There was no advice, no disapproving looks, no need to compete, no need to prove myself. I was safe to explore all of me, including my emotional self, which was key to undoing the pain and the hurt that I'd been carrying for far too long in my life. We spoke honestly about our life experiences, our hopes, our expectations, our dreams, our vision, our pain, and our vulnerabilities. This supported us tremendously as fathers and as men, as it broke our isolation and supported us to begin to undo male gender conditioning. The fact that we were demonstrating our love and care for each other by listening respectfully and supportively was the most important factor to countering this conditioning. This was also key to contradicting the negative effects of homophobia on us as men. as this can inhibit men from giving their sons and other men the physical and emotional contact that they need to grow into nurturing, caring and loving men. I remember speaking to a father some years ago about expressing our love for our children emotionally and physically. I could see him cringe at this very thought. His reply to me was, "Sure, don't I show my love by what I do for them?" This man met our CEO recently, and we recounted that conversation as he spoke now of understanding what I was saying that day. His experience as a volunteer on Suicide Watch had an immense impact on him and his understanding of the need for men to express their love emotionally, physically, as well as doing loving things. Another important dimension to the doing aspect of loving emerged as part of the MDN conducted study on the effects of the recession on men's lives. I remember having a conversation with a man who was visibly devastated by becoming unemployed for the first time in his life. This man had created a successful business and had a high profile on various social platforms, only to lose his business and his social status. I was particularly struck by the fact that this man, who could no longer express his love by doing so much for so many, had no sense of the love he had once given, or that he was still lovable even though he could no longer express his love as he used to. This experience was a recurring difficulty for many of the men we interviewed, and it highlighted the old paradigm that for many men, they still see themselves first and foremost as providers and doers. And when their capacity to provide is diminished, then it is experienced as a deep wound to their hearts. Challenging, disinhibiting and disempowering belief that men's love can only be demonstrated through providing or doing is a very important aspect of a new conversation with men. So what are the key factors to countering these barriers when establishing a new conversation with men? Well, firstly, the most important factor was that I wanted to do this for myself, as a man and as a father. That I sought out other men who were also interested in this development process. The support of women was also helpful to making these contacts and relationships. That I was prepared to risk vulnerability in order to explore with men the issues that we encounter in our everyday lives and the impact of them on us as men and in our relationships with others. The agreement of ground rules was a key factor towards supporting this process in terms of creating safety for men to be open. A very important aspect of this exploration was the impact of male gender and social conditioning on us as men and in our relationships with women, children and the broader society. We worked from the premise that men are innately loving, intelligent, creative and diverse. We established a safe, supportive and developmental environment where we were facilitated to connect with these innate qualities while also exploring what inhibited us from staying connected to these qualities. This supported us to begin to create lives that reflect these aspects of our humanity. Finally, being a father to my children as they grow up has been one of the most important aspects of my life, and one that I cherish and hold dearly in my heart. From the time they were born, I could see their beauty, intelligence, creativity, their love of play and social interaction with others. Their need to love and be loved, to be held and comforted in times of hurt, sadness and distress. The joy I felt seeing them develop and grow into themselves. It also challenged me enormously to know my strengths, my weaknesses, my blind spots, my fears, my vulnerabilities, my limits. My courage to be with and hold those times in my life when I felt powerless, afraid, disappointed, grief-stricken, lost and lonely. And to break my isolation by asking for help and support. Connecting to my innate goodness and sharing my vulnerabilities as a man has given me the strength to love and receive love. To be a father and now a grandfather who is connected to my love for each of my children and grandchildren in their uniqueness and beauty. A new conversation with men has been a critical part of coming to a new understanding of what it means to be a man and a father. There's also been some small inspirations along the way which have been very helpful. So if I may, I'll leave you with a couple of verses of a song I remember hearing a number of years ago by Mike and the Mechanics. It struck a chord with me at the time as it reminded me of why I was choosing to change my understanding of what it means to be a man and a father. It's called The Living Years. I wasn't there that morning when my father passed away. I didn't get to tell him all the things I had to say. I think I caught his spirit later that same year. I'm sure I heard his echo in my baby's newborn tears. I just wish I could have told him in the living years. When I heard this song, it moved me to tears and also to action, to continue this new conversation with men. One that enabled me to know myself and other men more fully. One that would support each of us to connect again with our loving nature as men and as fathers. Thank you.
Tak jsem rád, že na této konferenci zazněla taky poezie. A teď bych rád předal slovo Johnu Evojovi, který v Irsku proslul, už můžu říct, proslul jako sociální podnikatel, dokonce za to dostal cenu, se svým projektem, který do češtiny těžko přeložit, snad mužské kůlny, ale v angličtině to zní trochu lépe. Každopádně je to projekt, který vlastně velmi originálně čelí finanční krizi. Takže, Johne, máš slovo.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks, Liam. That was inspiring, and thanks, Linda, for organising. Yeah, so I'm lucky enough. Again, I suppose like a lot of people in the room, I get to do a job that I love, I suppose slightly like what Liam was saying, based on some of my own experiences and the need for something better for guys in certain circumstances in Ireland and probably in lots of other countries as well. The men's sheds is an Australian concept, and it's not something that came up with. It began to happen organically in Australia about 20 years ago, where guys, probably socially isolated guys, came together to work on projects just in the company of other men. It was just, and it happened in different places. It happened with some Aboriginal men, and it happened with some ex-Vietnam war vets who found it really difficult to reintegrate into society. So at this stage now, I'm giving you the short version of the story. There's over 1,000 men's sheds in Australia. There's over 200 in Ireland. There's another 100 in the UK. And there's sheds popping up in places like Denmark, Canada, Finland, and there's talks in a few other countries. And but basically why I need to say that at this stage is because if you visited any of those 1,500 odd sheds and you asked them what a men's shed was, you'd probably get 1,500 different answers. So it's really quite difficult to define, really. But basically a men's shed is any community space where guys come together and work on projects in the company of other men. They're mutually agreed activities. The guys decide those projects themselves. New members are always welcome, and where there's an underlying objective to enhance the health and well-being of the men. It really took off in Ireland, I suppose, in the last few years. I suppose because of some of the energy we put in after experience. I was lucky enough to visit Australia and see them firsthand, but also because of the recession that hit Ireland. Like between 2007 and say to the peak or the lowest point, the unemployment in Ireland rose dramatically up to about 14.8%. 2/3 of the people who were unemployed at that time in Ireland were men. An even larger proportion of those who were considered long-term unemployed, that would be people who were considered unemployed for a year or more. And there was loads of other things affecting men. There was suicide in Ireland is a big problem for men, and 80% of the people who die by suicide in Ireland are men, and that's an average of 2 guys every day. You know, so just imagine today, like there's going to be 2 more men in Ireland who've died by suicide, and I'm not sure the statistics here, but and that, like, there's loads of other stuff. There was, like, 2/3 of the people who die by all preventative illnesses are men, whether that's like non-communicable illnesses like heart or stroke. Basically, loads of guys know they should be doing loads of stuff that would be better for them, whether it's like eating less junk food, drinking less, smoking less, driving more carefully, participating in less risky behaviours at work, all that sort of stuff. But, like, telling guys isn't enough. We needed to find a space where, like, fellas could just chat a bit amongst themselves in a safe space where when they are chatting about that stuff, they come to realise that there might be a better way of doing some things. I suppose I've been really careful to add in loads of slides here, because the idea is that the slides will be circulated afterwards, because I know I'm not going to speak to half of them. But it was really important, I suppose, to try and define what a shed is. So bear with me now, translator. When I came back from Australia, I was explaining what a men's shed is. So then I had to go back to Australia to tell them what it was like trying to explain to the Irish what a men's shed is. And I kind of used the analogy of when some of the explorers first went to down to Australia, like 300 or 400 years ago, and they're coming back to the queens or kings of Spain and England, and they found these new animals. And so, can you imagine they're trying to describe a platypus? Does everybody know what a platypus is? Does anybody know what a platypus is? Well, it's the strange animal, anyway, that you get in Tasmania, that's got, like, a beak like a duck, and it feeds its young on milk like a cow, but it's got a pouch like a kangaroo, but it lays eggs like a hen, right? So if you're thinking of a hen or a duck or a kangaroo or a cow, it's nothing like that. Absolutely nothing like that. And a men's shed is a bit like that. We think about sheds in terms of training programs, about men's health programs, about even sports, all these things that guys can do in sheds, but it's not. It's a whole new animal. It's where guys come together and work on stuff. I suppose the idea is, like, our motto is that men don't talk face to face, they talk shoulder to shoulder, and it's not really an instruction. It was just an insight that a guy, Barry Golden, had. But basically, we found that lots of guys would, when they're encouraged, like Liam was saying, to talk about their stuff, they have resistance to that. But if you throw a broken lawnmower or a broken chainsaw or something up on a bench in the middle of a room, and you come back 3 or 4 hours later, everybody knows everything about everybody. And the lawnmower might still be broken, but that's another day's work. And so basically, these sheds are popping up all. I'll skip through some of this. Are popping up all over the country, but basically, it's a space where fellas can go. They find meaning and purpose, some friendship and belonging, and they find the mutual support they need to kind of live a fuller life. It's open to all guys. We have found that in Australia, the average age of the guys are retiring, are at retiring age, and that's to do with their full employment, more or less full employment. In Ireland, however, there was a lot more younger lads who participated in the shed, and that's obviously because they had time on their hands because they were unemployed. So basically what happens is some fellas who are isolated, whatever, they go to a local shed. When they attend the shed, they start to develop friendships, they learn new skills off each other, they start to feel a bit better about themselves, and they talk about what's going on in their lives, just about their life and times. There's no need to talk about a deep issue if they don't feel like it. And because of that, their physical, mental and emotional health improves, and they begin to flourish. We did some research. The Dundalk Institute of Technology carried out the first survey of men's sheds last year, and they found that 91% of the guys who participated in the shed improved better well-being. 74% felt happier at home, and that was really interesting, because up to that point I would have felt that, like, when a guy went to a shed, he was obviously in a better space and hanging around with guys, but to find out that they bring that contentment with them when they leave, and it improves their whole life. All the guys enjoyed the social aspect. We always say that, like, most sheds, if you visit a men's shed, it's usually an old building, poorly done up, and there's some tools there, and guys could be working on furniture or renovating old computers. So most sheds have tools, but we always say that the most important tool in the shed is the kettle, because the cup of tea that makes the difference. People just have the chat, and they relax, and they can be all sorts of things. They can be televisions, there can be pool tables, it's anything that the guys choose them to want them to be. There's quite a lot of info on that slide and we'll skip it. But yeah, so there's now 220 men's sheds across the island of Ireland, and there's new sheds opening all the time. We set up a small network of men's sheds across Europe just to try and, to reinforce the idea, because I think it's very important for the guys who participate in the sheds to realise that it's not just them and their 5 or 6 mates in somewhere locally, that they're part of something bigger, that, you know, that there's lots and lots, hundreds and thousands of guys who are facing similar issues right across the world, regardless of their country or the language or the culture, and that by realising that they're not alone anymore makes a huge difference in people's lives. You know, so yeah, I won't go too much into the background of how the men's sheds happened. It's all available online. I suppose it's important to say some of the basic stuff around sheds is that the guys get to choose what they do. So it's very hard. I know when you're planning to set up a men's shed, you say, what's going to go on there? And you actually don't know. It's like you get a few guys together and you start talking about this whole concept, and you get them to visit a few existing sheds. And then because particularly if you're looking for a few quid or some money to start a shed, a funder will always know what you're going to spend it on. But it's very difficult to say that when you don't actually know yourselves. But that's the beauty of it. It's the empowerment and the taking responsibility of running their own project that brings that kind of purpose back into their lives. There was another interesting finding in that research. It said where guys, so a small number of sheds would have got big chunks of funding. So they'd have these perfect buildings with maybe 20,000 quid's worth of tools and anything you could want in terms of computers or pool tables and that. But the research showed that guys, if they've got nothing, but they just come together and they start talking about setting up their project, and they start meeting once a week or once every 2 weeks, it's actually the shared vision and the shared purpose and the identity that can give them that enhances their well-being. And the well-being outcomes for the guys who have no tools and no money is the exact same as the guys who have all the resources. So it's something much deeper within that the well-being comes from. It's from the social connectedness. It's from having the shared goals. It's having, you know, a vision again, because there were lots of guys as a consequence of the recession and other issues. You know, we're lost in Ireland, I suppose. You know, I mentioned the suicide. There's a huge issue with mental health issues in Ireland. I don't know if I can get into it now, but like I think it was clear that like suicide wasn't only a mental health issue, like that was a social and economic issue as well. And we would have seen, for example, like if a guy can no longer be the breadwinner and he's lost his job and he can't fulfill the role of providing for his family, and he you know, can't pay the mortgage, and then suddenly like his sense of identity goes down and down, and then he attends a doctor, and then he gets some tablets, and then he's categorized as having a mental health issue, and then it's the mental health that contributes to the suicide statistics. It's actually not. It was like, you know, where did all the jobs go? Or where did, you know, we had a big problem with negative equity in Ireland, where lots of people owed more money on their houses than the houses were worth. So, like, if the government could do something about that, for example, it would probably be a lot better for people's mental health than dishing out loads of, very good, thank you, dishing out loads of tablets. But that's just my opinion, and obviously I'm not a doctor. So yeah, I want to draw attention to this book very briefly. It was a book that came out last year that we contributed to in Ireland, and it was written by a guy called Professor Barry Golan, and he summarised kind of about the men's sheds movement internationally, and it's well worth a read in the context of what we're talking about today. And this is just a note. So if you know any guys who've got some time on their hands, it's probably not as good to translate, but if they've got some time on their hands, they might think about setting up a men's shed. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Díky, Johne. My jsme se potkali před pár měsíci v Irsku v mužské chajdě a atmosféra toho místa mi něco hrozně připomínala a teď mi došlo, co to bylo. Většina českých kluků, alespoň mého věku, zná příběhy komiksové jednoho autora, jmenuje se Jaroslav Foglar. A mužské chajdy v Irsku mi připomněly atmosféru kluboven z rychlých šípů. Tak si myslím, že pro tuhletu myšlenku je Česko extrémně dobře připravená země. A napadá mě ještě jedna věc z tvé prezentace. Ukazoval si mapu, kde je Irsko poseté mužskými chajdami. My máme trošku jinak postavené hnutí. Před nějakými 20 lety se v Čechách začaly tvarovat mateřská centra, což jsou místa, kde se začaly scházet ženy na mateřské dovolené, a ty důvody, proč se začaly scházet, byly velmi podobný těm, které si zmiňoval, když si mluvil o tom, proč se chlapi schází v chajdách. Dneska je v Čechách přes 700 těchto center a z původně mateřských center se stávají centry rodinnými a komunitními. Začínají dělat programy pro muže, pro starší děti. A je to teda 20letý vývoj. Rád bych se zeptal, jestli si myslíš, že se vytvaruje z hnutí mužských bout něco, jako jsou komunitní centra nebo místa, která stimulují další společenské změny. Nejen tu péči o muže, kteří tam přicházejí, ale i ovlivňování okolí. Protože ten network 200 míst, několik tisíc chlapů je docela silný. Jestli si myslíš, že to má potenciál pro to způsobovat nějaké další řízenější změny?
So, I don't know, in Ireland and in Australia, my understanding is that, and in the UK as well, that there was a really strong women's movement, community education women's movement, in the late 70s, 80s and 90s, which led to the creation of a lot of women's groups and then to some community centres. So quite similar to what you've described here in the Czech Republic. So then, as a part of that, there was identified that men didn't really participate on any level in community education or health promotion projects or community education projects, and that by and large, that was a male-free zone, maybe 10% of people. So that the Men's Sheds movement is actually, in some way, a response to that, rather than the other way around. Do you know, we've been asked, like, I suppose it's important to say, like, I'd say that the Men's Sheds is probably the most pro-women men's movement you could get. That I find that we talked a lot about caring. It's really interesting, the percentage of when we get contacted about setting up a new shed, like more than half of the time it's from women who are worried about like their husbands or their uncles or their grandfathers or their sons who are who are a little bit lost or who need something in their lives. So I think it's kind of clear that you know, it's working well as a response to maybe the issues that men are facing, but I don't know if it'll evolve. I think if it evolved into like community centres, but there's a lot of community centres already in our countries fulfilling those needs, I think it might lose some of the benefits to men, because the research does show that the male-only space is one of the strengths, and it's why the guys feel safe enough to open up and speak to each other.
Hi. Just in terms of the work possibly going into the family resource centres and that, the Men's Development Network carried out an audit of the family resource centres and the community development projects in Ireland. And what we found was that they had a strong need for training themselves in terms of understanding what the issues were that men were actually coming up against in their lives. And I think it's a very important piece to be able to bring into those centres, and having that experience through talking to, listening, engaging with men, hearing what those issues are, having them articulated for themselves. You know, and I think it's really important, particularly in terms of active fatherhood, you know, where men are actually supported to talk about those deeper issues, talk about their connection to their children, or their lack of connection, as it may be, you know, or if there's any other difficulties in their life. And through our engagement with men over the years, and they communicating those issues to us, we were able to work with the family resource centres, as I said, around providing training for them in terms of even using another program we have, which is it's another version of the new Conversation with Men, is 7 questions training. So we work with the family resource centres to train them in our 7 questions training. So they might ask the man, what's going well in your life? What's not going well in your life? What steps do you need to take? What supports might you need with that? You know, again, then what's your following step with that? And then we'd ask the man to come back maybe the following week or the following month after that issue, and we'd ask, how did that go for you? What was that like? What was the outcome there? What would you like to do next? So this active engagement of gauging with the men on an intellect as well as an emotional level is a really key part to actually supporting men. So I think, you know, certainly the training that we've done with the family resource centres and the community development projects have really been useful, and the feedback that we've been getting from the family resource centres reflect that.
Díky a chci dát ještě příležitost jednomu člověku z publika, jestli má dotaz na některého z našich hezkých hostů. Tak já mám dotaz, ne? Slečna, prosím.
Mě by zajímalo, jak to funguje v praxi, když se vlastně ti muži sejdou, tak co začnou dělat? Přijde tam někdo nový, teď jestli si chce něco opravit z domu si přinese, nebo jestli si tam jenom sednou u kafe. Jak jako funguje ta iniciace v praxi?
Thank you. So both what you said is correct, but basically if you're setting up a men's shed, you'll get 3 or 4 guys who would need to know a little bit about the concept, maybe a bit of research into the Irish situation or the Australian situation. And then the model that we advocate for is a low-cost, sustainable model. So in Ireland, for example, after the recession, there was loads of vacant premises. So we try and get vacant premises for a free rent from a council or from a generous businessman or something like that. And then it really is whatever projects that the guys want to do. But part of the objective is that whatever projects they undertake, that they can make a little bit of money so they can keep the project going, so that they don't look for government funding, that it's like they can renovate bikes or make some furniture and sell it, but the money goes back into the project. It's like a social enterprise, and that it becomes self-sustainable through the activities that the guys undertake. And I think even the process of making sure it's self-sustainable, there's great responsibility and great pride in that. That also brings like some personal development.
Děkuju teda za odpověď, jak vlastně se vytváří to centrum. A teďka ještě k tomu praktickému fungování. Vy jste hovořil spíš, že to je vlastně taková jakoby na horizontální úrovni interakce, ale když třeba tam přijdou ti muži, kdo jim říká, co mají dělat, nebo jestli tam jako je prostě nějaký koordinátor, který třeba uvozuje ty aktivity, spíš jako, já si to představuji spíš jako nějaký vlastně workshopy nebo dílničky, ale když tam třeba někdo přijde, jak ví, co má dělat, kde se může zapojit, kdo to začíná, kdo to navrhuje ty aktivity, nebo jestli ti muži sami si přijdou, sami začnou.
Yeah, all the sheds are different, so no straight answers, unfortunately. And each men's shed is an autonomous organisation, so they're all slightly different. But by and large, there's no paid coordinators, except in a very small number of sheds, that it's the group of guys who choose their own activities. So shortly after starting, they may choose to elect a committee or a group, but it's usually a very kind of, like you say, horizontal organisation where all members, including new members, contribute to the decisions of what projects are going to happen. And not everybody has to do the same project. So you could have like 5 guys working on making a piece of furniture, 3 guys on a computer, like 4 guys drinking tea, and it's all happening at the one time. People often describe it can be like a pub with no beer, where it's just people can just pop in and participate in whatever's happening. And if the project that you're interested in isn't started there, then it's up to you as an individual to start that project. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I just give a response in terms of, you know, what would actually help to progress the work in terms of our structure and what have you? again, going back to my own presentation, the first and foremost, the most important thing was that I wanted to do this for myself as a man, as a father. So if there's men there or women who want to support men, to begin to actually talk about our lives as we experience them in our everyday. So, when we talked about people being unemployed, for example, that's a really difficult time for people. There's worry about mortgages, anxiety, childcare, looking after the family. And if we don't talk about these issues, then we carry them with them all of the time. So we wanted to create a model where men would begin to talk about these issues. So I had to model that for myself. So I began to talk to other men about where I was struggling in my life, the challenges I had around being a father, around being a worker, around being just myself in everyday life, the different issues that I would come up against that I would find difficult. As you begin to model that and you begin to introduce other men to that, you can create the environment where men will begin to talk to each other about those personal issues and really get good support. And out of that, what we did then, when there was 4 or 5 of us actually started initially to do that, and we set up the ground rules and the agreements that would actually make it safe to talk about our lives more fully. We found that really useful. We did it for about maybe 6 months to a year or so. And then we decided, well, if it's useful for us, then maybe it's useful for other men. So we invited men who were going to the family resource centres and the community development projects to our first regional men's day. And we opened up that day by asking the men to talk about, well, what are the issues in our life? So there were unemployment, there was separation, there was divorce, there was relationships breakdown. There was a whole lot of different issues. And men talked about those days. And we made a list of those issues. That allowed us to go to actually the government and say, men have these real serious issues in their life that they need a place to be able to be supported to address those issues for themselves and for their families. And that got funding actually brought into the men's network. That was the actually establishment of the men's network. And out of that, we supported those men then that had come to our first regional day to begin to do that in their own communities, in their projects, in their family resource centres or in their community development projects, to begin to invite other men in to have those conversations that they were having with us about their lives and about all the issues that they have in their lives. And that created a model, and we developed a structure then for those men to actually then themselves to have their own particular days where they would invite men in to talk about how they had developed the project for themselves and that really supported the building of that project. So now we have 40 volunteers nationally who actually support this work in their local community. So they're outreaching to men. Again, they're modelling it. They're going out and talking to men, inviting them in, and again modelling the work in terms of talking about what their own experiences are as men and as fathers. And that really is beginning to make it safe for other men to begin to have those conversations. But someone really needs to take a lead, and it needs to be active in our experience.
Těší nás. Ještě jeden dotaz. Já vám teda tu příležitost dám, ale poslední fakt.
Já jsem se ještě chtěla zeptat, vy jste mluvil o tom, že se vlastně daří otvírat různá témata a že se daří, aby se ty muži vzájemně jakoby svěřovali se svou životní situací. Setkali jste se někdy s tím, že by muži otevřeli třeba i téma násilí? Myslíte si, že je to vhodná platforma na to otvírat i taková témata?
Yes, I would have had men who would have been struggling with violence in their lives. And it's a very, very serious issue. And we developed a domestic violence intervention program. Our coordinator is here, he'll be here this afternoon speaking about the issue. So again, this was really important, that it was safe enough for men to say, I have an issue with violence. Because again, it's not something that men are going to open up very easily about. But again, it was about us being able to create the safety by showing our own vulnerabilities, by showing our own struggles, that a man was able to say, well, I have an issue of violence in my life. And be able to be heard and be able to support it around addressing that issue of violence. And again, John will talk about it in more detail because there's a whole procedure that he needs to go through then in terms of assessment before he's brought into a group and so on. But again, that's a very, very powerful program, and So yes, the answer to your question is yes, violence is very much an issue for men, yeah.